Brian from Consumers Energy, what's going on with this weather outside?
Yeah, it is Friday the 13th, isn't it? I'd forgotten that fact. But, you know, don't worry. We have more bad weather in store, not just for today, but for the 14th, the 15th, all weekend long, it looks like. So, above all else, our job is to be prepared for this. And so we want you to know that we've been monitoring the weather. We knew the storm was coming, and those high winds are in the forecast and they're happening as we speak. So, to anyone who's listening who might be without power right now, we want to reassure you we're aware we're going to be restoring power today as quickly and safely as we can. And through today and through the weekend, we just are grateful for people's patience because we love Michigan. We don't always love the weather.
Yeah, no. What do you think when it comes to weather like this with the snow versus these strong winds? What do you fear the most, or what makes it the most challenging for your crews?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's funny to think that we can get a foot of snow, and I've seen situations like that where it's had next to no impact on the electric grid. So what really is the concern is first winds, and we're talking 60, 65 mile per hour gusts today. It's because they're going to knock trees, knock branches down into our equipment, onto power lines, causing power outages. And as we know from experience, ice doesn't happen quite as often to the level that it affects us, but when it does, it can be very serious. The famous example we like to share is you put a half inch of ice on a string of power line. That's going to be about the same weight as a baby grand piano. So a lot of pressure, a lot of weight that holds things down. And you'll remember even too, last year we had that massive storm in northern Michigan, north by the tip of the thumb, and I'm sorry, by the tip of the mitten, and an inch and a half of ice, just massive problems. So thankfully, I don't think we're quite looking at that, but we're looking at problems when it comes to Mother Nature.
Do with the technology, we always talk about technology when it comes to power and the power grid and restoration and such. Are things made better these days when it comes to the power lines and the poles and the resources and all of that? Are things just easier to maintain and more stable?
Yeah, that's a great question. The job of restoring power is it's a human one, and that's why we talked about going into this weekend, 450 crews, 2 or 3 people to a crew. So that's 1,000, 1,500 people who are going to be actively outside in this weather in the community restoring power. But technology plays a role and a beneficial one. We have I won't get into too many details, but essentially you've got think of it as switching where you can move the flow of power around automatically in an automated fashion, so that maybe if you have an outage that affects 1,000 people, you might be able to do some things pretty quickly in that first 20 minutes or half hour that reduces the number of people without power. 1,000 becomes 500 or 400. And so that just simplifies and speeds up the job of restoring power to everybody. So, I don't pretend to understand all the technology, but I know it's certainly pushing us in a good direction. The other thing I think that's important and something you can think about today if you're in the dark is that same technology allows us to see what's happening on the grid across the state. So you as a customer can go to our online site, consumersenergy.com/outage center. Of course, you can see the outage map to see where outages are, but also get alerts so that we can send you emails, text, and phone calls that just give you the latest and greatest. Particularly, you've gone off to work, you've lost power back at home. We can still inform you. You can figure out what's going on. You don't have to be at home to know when you're expecting to get power back.
Yeah, absolutely. What has that made things easier? Because when I remember power goes out, and we want to know when it's going to turn back on, and a lot of people expect it's an instant thing that happens, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes, in my second part of that question is sometimes you have to turn the power off to turn it back on. Does that still happen?
Yeah, it's not a simple process sometimes. Like I said, I don't want to bore folks with the details, but yeah, there are occasions where as you're making a repair, you have to deal with a section of customers as you're restoring power. Imagine physically that tree or that limb that's sitting on the power line. There are steps you have to go through from a safety perspective and just the process of restoring power. But I think we're in a better place now than we were a generation ago, a time before we had an outage map that showed you information. I know from my own childhood and experiences losing power where, you're just kind of, as a kid, it's kind of fun actually. But, I'm sure as the adults who are counting on the household or their business getting back to normal, you're waiting, you're calling the power company asking what's going to be happening. So we want to inform people in real time. We also want to do better. And what that means is we're going to be first focused on power restoration this weekend, and it's going to be around the clock. Power, we work until the power gets on for everybody. Next week, when things get better, when the forecast improves, you're going to see us at work again. Hopefully, you'll still see more consumers energy trucks in your community as we're making upgrades and repairs, stronger poles, new equipment, more of that technology we talk about, clearing trees away from power lines. Because ultimately, the more we can do on the front end before the bad weather hits, it makes those storm response situations a lot easier.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we see that when we see parking lots with the trucks. I mean, a parking lot could be filled with trucks ready and on standby. Let's talk about this weekend, and specifically, you mentioned the teams are ready. You tend to know the weather and what's going to happen prior to. Do you mind, without, we don't want to jump too much into it, but how does consumers, you're not like, oh, hey, let's turn on the TV and check the weather forecast. Your team is ready. You dispatch, you get people prepared and in hotel rooms and everything else.
Sure.
And it's pretty down to pretty streamlined these days.
Yeah, and that's the way it needs to be, because clearly, if we have a jump on the weather, then it doesn't get the jump on us. We're listening to radio stations, we're watching TV like anybody is, but we also have, for one, we have a professional meteorologist who's on our staff. That was a change in the last couple of years, because we look so much at forecasting to understand the challenges that we were up against. Having someone who's full-time on staff who gives us those real-time updates. She was up early this morning and up late last night, sharing a lot of information. That really allows us that visibility, and that insight allows us to prepare. And so you're right. The nice thing is, Michigan, the forecast can vary between regions quite dramatically.
Mhm.
We have a service territory that extends across the lower peninsula. And so when we see the weather forecast and we see the preparations, we can move our crews across the state physically, put them in hotel rooms closer to where we think, say in Ludington, where we think there may be a higher prospect for power outages. You're moving those chess pieces across the board, so to speak.
Mhm.
As for the human beings, the people who are out there restoring power, they have a system they've prepared for. They know how to work in this sort of weather, but they also have to adjust their schedules, right? If we see the forecast says there's going to be bad weather in the PM, they're sleeping through the afternoon or getting that rest that they need so that they're fresh. And then if you're an individual electric line worker for Consumers Energy, or a contractor who we hire in from Michigan to work on our system, it's 16 hours at a time that you can work. So you
Okay.
start your job, say, let's say it's noon today, your shift starts at then, you're going till about 4 in the morning around the clock, obviously with some breaks, and so that allows us to really stitch together a response. That means we're constantly restoring power, with an ultimate goal of 24 hours or less for everybody.
How much do they how much do they work with local authorities and first responders? Because we see the fire department out and other agencies. What is that interaction like, and how does that work?
Yeah, and you've probably noticed before that, I think people see when power goes out, when there's a big storm, there are certain customers sometimes who come on before others. Some of that has to do with geography or the ability to repair a circuit. But also we do prioritize circuits, sections of the grid that serve what we call critical customers, our police and fire stations, hospitals, senior centers. We want to make sure that really the backbone of our society is strengthened first and is restored first. But that interaction continues, where we're in constant conversation with their state emergency officials, local police and fire. They're providing us through our contacts, for one thing, more information, right? Maybe there's a a sewage pumping station that's without power. That's important to get back on more quickly as well. And they're helping us to guard those downed wires that we want people to stay away from and report those hazards. Ultimately, the job is to restore power quickly and safely, but we have to really hit hard on safely. We want to get through every storm situation with no injuries, no one hurt, no one affected by this, not just Consumers Energy's employees, but everybody who we serve in the community.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I know we are short on time this morning, but you sent out a press release labeled Consumers Energy Unveils the Electric Supply Plan to keep energy reliable and bills lower. And we're going to put the information in the comment section on our Facebook
Yeah.
pages that we're streaming this to. But do you mind taking, if you could, about 60 seconds to
Yeah.
just kind of tell us if you could, about that?
Yeah, and maybe this is part of a future conversation as well, but
Absolutely.
we've started the process. We're focused right now on the short term, this weekend, of course, but we're also planning for the future. And what that means is this week we shared some information about where we're going to get energy from here in Michigan for the next 20 years. We have a plan that we're putting together. We're going to file with our state regulators soon, building more natural gas plants in the Bay region to help power our state, more wind, more solar energy, and more battery storage, speaking of technology, that allows us to store and provide energy. So you're going to be hearing more details about these particular projects and, of course, the big picture. But, of course, we have to make sure we're generating enough power here in our state, and that's going to serve Michigan for the long term.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Let's plan on having you back on and diving into that, because it's an interesting, when people do take the time to read through this and see what this is all about. It's pretty amazing. I think it's a cool step forward for sure. Let's plan on having you back on in the future on that. What's your final message for those that are in the listening area about this weekend with the weather?
Yeah, please be safe. Please watch out for downed wires, run those generators safely, and go to online consumersenergy.com/outage center or download our app. You can get information. We're working to restore power. We want to make sure you know what's going on as well.
All right, good information there, Brian. Thank you so much for you've been with consumers for quite a long time, and we rely on you from the media standpoint. We reach out to you, a text message, a phone call, and obviously the conversation today. So thank you
Yeah,
for being a part of the conversation and doing what you're doing.
thanks. Have a great day.
All right, you too. It is 102.7 Mom FM and Hot Country Hits 99.9. And speaking